Hello, I'm Steve Conover, Executive Vice President and VP of Media Ministries. This is Israel at War. Last time we looked at the situation in Gaza with Dr. Jim Showers, Executive Director of the Friends of Israel. I've asked Jim back to discuss the current situation with Hezbollah and Lebanon on Israel's northern border. I'm joined by Dr. Jim Showers. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Steve.
Last time we discussed Gaza. We'd like to turn and look at the north of what's happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And a question I'm receiving a lot these days is, why didn't Hezbollah join Hamas in the attacks on October 7th?
Well, we're hearing some various reasons why. Number one, it was a decision of Iran not to send Hezbollah in. It would appear from some of the things we're hearing that Hamas jumped the gun, if you will, that this plan had been put together by Iran in conjunction with Hezbollah, but Iran wasn't necessarily ready for the attack to come as soon as it did. And so it caught Hezbollah and Iran somewhat off guard, and not that they didn't understand the plan, just that they weren't ready for it to be launched as quickly. Part of me says it's hard to believe Iran doesn't know everything that's going on. But you have to keep in mind, too, if you think of the proxies of Iran as assets, and looking at what Israel's doing to Hamas, if they had sent Hezbollah in, they would have put their two key assets that they use to oppose Israel at risk. And if they lost both, then they would really be set back years. So one of the things we know about Iran, they're very strategic. They don't just haphazard do things. They always have a strategy. It's well thought out. And the West often doesn't understand it or misjudges it. But Iran, their ultimate goal is to wipe Israel off the map. They've said that publicly. But that is a long-term plan. And short of Israel launching an attack against Iran, it looks like they're not going to send Hezbollah in. Hezbollah has rather been used to create a lot of trouble along the border to show that they're supporting Hamas, but not doing ultimately what Hamas is begging them to do, which is come into the conflict. And now that Hamas has been really decimated by Israel, and Hezbollah and Iran can see the response Israel has, Hezbollah fully understands that if they launch an offensive against Israel, they can do damage to Israel. There's no doubt. People will die. They will create a lot of terror with their missiles that are better guided missiles than Hamas has. But Israel will do to them what they're doing in Gaza. They will, the southern half of Lebanon will be leveled. And they learned some things from the 2006 conflict. In 2006, while they were able with their Air Force to inflict great damage, when they sent the ground troops in, they weren't well coordinated. They weren't able to really take out all of the Hezbollah terrorists like they're doing in Gaza today. And so from that, they put together the strategy they're using today in Gaza, and they would use the same strategy up in Lebanon if Hamas or if Hezbollah were to come into the conflict. So anytime you have what's going on at the border, so Hezbollah will launch some missiles and mortars and artillery into Israel along the border. Israel will respond and hit them back. You're always on the precipice of somebody stepping one step too far and going over the edge. So there's always the danger that some event, perhaps a missile from Hezbollah, will strike and kill a lot of people or do really incredible damage. And Israel will have no choice but to respond, or vice versa. Israel will do something that Hezbollah says that's just too far. We've got to respond to this. But what we do know is Hezbollah will do nothing without Iran approving it. There's a difference between Hamas and Hezbollah in terms of their relationship with Iran. Hezbollah is Shia Muslims, which is what Iran is. They're Shia Muslims, whereas Hamas is Sunni. And so Iran will guard Hezbollah more than they will Hamas. And it appears Iran's willing to let Hamas be expendable to gain the PR and, Just knowledge, if you lived in Israel prior to October 7th, you felt relatively secure. Yeah, there were threats, and occasionally people died, but October 7th was a turning point. It was a day of infamy, if you will. And Israel now knows that they cannot follow the policies they were using over the last 20, 30 years of believing that if they spent enough time in negotiations and talking, they could work out a peace agreement that would allow everybody to live in peace. They now know the determination of the radical Muslims in the Palestinian areas. They're not going to accept peace. But listen, they've been saying that from the beginning. This is not new. We're not hearing something we haven't heard before. We just didn't believe it. And now they believe it. And so if you live in Israel, you realize that you can no longer take for granted the status quo. That as long as you have an enemy that will not rest until you are eliminated, you have to be always vigilant. The cry, never again, is a cry that says we will never allow another people group to try to wipe us out. And that's why Israel understands as a nation, Israeli by Israeli, that this has to be done. And they have to stand up, because in the Middle East, strength is everything. And any time you're hit and you don't respond strongly, you're viewed as weak. And they love to seize on weakness. This is a strong, incredibly strong message that Israel is sending to the Arab world and the whole world, that as a nation, they're not going to be pushed into the sea. They are not going to take it. They are going to defend themselves. And that is really, if you think about the responsibility of any government, to defend their people against any and all enemies. And that's exactly what Israel's doing. We understand that there's a spiritual dimension to this war as well. And I believe part of why Israel's had so much success is on a spiritual plane. God fights for Israel. God protects Israel. We've seen it in past wars. I think we're seeing it again. I'm reading accounts of people saying it's a miracle of God what happened, as they recount everything from surviving on the 7th to the amazing things that are happening in their campaign to wipe out Hamas. Israel has learned so much from the past that they're applying, but I think it's the Spirit of God who is helping them, because this is not just a battle between Israel and the Palestinians, particularly the terrorists. This is a battle between God and Satan.
So at the day of this recording, it's about 45 days since the start of the war. Hezbollah has launched over 1,000 rockets and drone attacks, other things that they've done, and it's been a war of attrition. Do you expect that to continue unless there is something, because they're kind of back on their heels now that Israel's along the northern border?
No, I think it'll continue. I think it will probably die down once the war in Gaza comes to a conclusion, once Israel's gained control. There will come a point where they risk Israel turning and taking on Hezbollah if they continue. So just as it's been over the last several years, where there's been occasional flare-ups on the border, but nothing that continued day after day, I think once the battle with Hamas is completed, we would look for a decrease in it and eventually quiet on the northern border. But one can never be sure.
Well, we look forward to and pray for the day that it's safe again in Israel, because we love bringing people to Israel.
For sure. And we look forward to the day we can get back there and continue visiting Israel, touring the country, seeing the land of the Bible, and encouraging Jewish people with our presence.
Amen. Thank you, Jim. You may be wondering what you can do for Israel at this critical time. If you want to stand with Israel and bring comfort to the Jewish people, you can donate at foi.org/standwithisrael. Use the link in the description to make a much-needed gift.